Welcome to another episode of the Baptist Boyz. I'm Jason Heath here with Aaron Tyner, and we're on staff here at Winchester First Baptist Church. Here we are
Our
again,
first.
first ever
Yep.
bonus episode. And you may notice, if you're watching online, you already see that we have a guest. If you're listening, you're going to have to wait just a second. But we do have a guest, and we're doing a bonus episode, like we said, first time ever.
Yep.
So this should be exciting. We don't know how this is going to go, but we know it's going to go. Right?
Yeah, it's our second. Well, I interviewed Kelly.
Yep.
We interviewed Marty, kind of. So we'll just see how it goes this time.
Well, this time we have very special guest, Keely. She's so cool, so
Keely.
famous. She goes by one name only.
Okay.
The Keely. Now, for some of those that may not know, Keely is the wife of Marty, who leads our worship on Sunday mornings here at Winchester First Baptist. And so we're excited to have Keely on today.
Last name Keith.
Yeah,
Thank you.
same, because they're married.
Last name Keith.
Yeah.
But you also didn't say Marty's last name.
I know, but our people kind of already know that.
Okay.
But anyway, so Keely's on today, and Keely, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Very good. Thank you. And so we have Keely on talking about,
Her books.
yeah, and writing.
Okay.
So at this point, I'm kind of out on giving you great ways of using your faith in writing and things like that. That's not my favorite.
Yeah.
But for some people, man, they love it. And that is where Keely comes in.
Thanks. Well,
That's an
great intro. Thank you so
Intro.
much, guys.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking a chance on a writer when you are, as you said, out of ways to use faith
Yeah.
in your writing. So I'm so proud of you guys for branching out of sports to and whatever else might interest you to talk to a writer. So way to go. Thank you for having me here. This is fun. And first bonus episode, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, right, we're going to start off like, okay, so you want to kind of give us a snapshot, everybody kind of a idea of kind of maybe who you are, kind of your interests, how you maybe got into writing, how writing has kind of been, how it kind of landed to be your thing and that you love, obviously enough to write a lot of books. You got to love it. So maybe kind of give us some insight on, and maybe we'll fall in love with writing too.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not my ultimate goal. But let's start with how I fell in love with writing. So I've always written stories, made up stories. I grew up in a family that moved a lot. And so I was always dreaming up adventures in faraway places. And I mean, I was writing stories like with crayon, you know. So when people say, when did you start writing? I don't know. Probably when I started breathing. Always making up stories. And love the writing. I wrote my first novel just to see if I could do. I wrote a lot of short stories and poems and, you know, dramatic teenager with the poetry. Wrote my first novel when I was early 20s just to kind of see if I could do 60,000 words. And did it. Did nothing with that. I'm glad I did because that was before I was living for the Lord. So we're glad that's deleted somewhere. Yeah, that's the standard for my novels are 60 to 70.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I know that many words.
I'm sure you do.
That sounds like a lot.
It's a lot of words. It is, but I don't write them in one day.
Yeah, right.
So I write maybe 500 to 1,000 words a day when I'm writing. So it's not a lot. I wouldn't want to do it in a week. Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of when I started writing. And then didn't really do much with it when Marty and I got married and started a family. And we were on the road a lot. And I was always telling him stories with hours on the road with his music ministry. And I'd tell him these stories. And I kind of always went back to this one story. I had this idea because when I was a kid, I loved maps. And I would always, my grandma would give me the maps out of the National Geographic magazine. You know, that was in the middle. She'd give those to me, and everywhere we'd move, first thing I'd do, and wherever we were, I'd put those maps up all over my walls. And I would stare at the big expanses of ocean. And I'd think, what if there's something there we can't see? You know, what if there's this hidden land that, you know, for some scientific reason we just can't find, you know? And people are there. I would kind of make up stuff with that. And then when we were first married, I kind of inherited all my family's genealogy papers from a relative. And so I started really digging into my family history. And then when Rachel was born, I started looking at his and stuff. And I loved how so many of because a lot of my ancestors had been in America from a way back, and they would migrate west in groups. And so I kind of put the ideas together, and I thought, what if groups of families, you know, instead of migrating west, what if a group got on a ship to leave Um, this is like 1800s. There was a lot of land in South America. They were bringing a lot of Amish plain people, Mennonites. They can do amazing things with land. So they'd bring a lot of them down to South America to turn in land into fertile farmland and stuff. So I thought, what if a group leaves America, but they get lost on the ship for whatever reason, and they end up on my imaginary land, this land that nobody's. So that's kind of the idea for the Uncharted series. And I sort of put the idea on the back burner. I was homeschooling and stuff, and Marty said one day, he's like, I have a challenge for you. I challenge you to write your book. And I was like, wow, I'm learning how to homeschool. I'm playing bass and worship teams. I'm okay. And so I thought I'll just write it one sentence at a time. We'll see what happens. And I looked over the notes. I thought, instead of starting the story when these people in the 1800s, get to this place uninhabited, and set up this society, what if I start it now or even in the future, a few years? This was like 2010, 2011 when I started with this idea. So I made it 2025 because that sounded way in the future, So I was going to set it in the future and imagine that these people are living there. It looks like Little House on the Prairie, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman kind of thing. And we have a World War III pilot, get ejected and he lands there. Mm-hmm. What's it look like? So that's where I started the Uncharted series. So that's where the land Uncharted starts. So it's set within the land, what's going on there. So it does have that prairie fiction sort of feel to it. Mm-hmm. But then there's stuff going on in the outside world too. And anybody that's lived the last 15 years knows a few things have happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So you always been writing here and there. You just needed that little tiny push to put it to paper, and you step out and you start doing that. How would you say your faith and also you being a mother, a wife, how's all that? Do you think that's impacted your writing, and in what ways?
Oh my goodness, in so many ways. To start with the faith element, I read a lot, and even in Christian fiction, because most of the Christian publishers aren't. I mean, they're all owned by New York publishers now. If they even still exist, there's not. There's still. I have a lot of author friends who are still sticking to their faith, but for the most part, it's really kind of tricky to pick up a book and know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And no matter what it is, what the story is, you get the author's worldview, whether you realize it or not. And the difference in reading, people are either fiction readers or they're not, because when you're reading, your brain engages in a completely different way. And people love that if they love reading fiction. It's like you're in the story, you're part of the story. Mm-hmm. But that can also leave people open to whatever ideas you're planting there. That's why we have to guard our kids and what they read.
Yeah.
And even ourselves. And I just noticed so much fiction. It was getting hard to read. And so I was like, I'm going to write something that, isn't cheesy, but isn't sleazy. Let's find something, can we make a engaging, exciting story, that, I could read to my Sunday school class too.
Right. Yeah.
Somewhere in between. So, and I invite God into every story I'm writing, into the page, to meet me on the page, because I know that not only are people reading for comfort and for excitement and whatever they're reading for, but also and now after so many books, they're expecting for the faith element to be there, and to learn something to encourage them in their faith. So that just it has to play into it. I'm not preachy. That's not that is not the point. Is for me to you can easily go the wrong way, and it's not a story anymore. It's just a sermon. So yeah, the faith element is definitely there, and then my faith affecting my writing career as a novelist. I didn't want anybody to see my stories. I mean, it's very personal. So even when I wrote The Land Uncharted, and I had several friends that are writers, and some in the publishing world that were like, "You need to get this published," I was just terrified. It's like, no, I just wrote it for me, just for us, just to see if I could, there's no way I want anybody to read what I've written. And so that took a lot of prayer. And so just my own faith with the Lord, knowing, if he's called me, he's going to lead me, and trusting in him the whole way. And he's been so faithful and protected me so much. And yeah. So what was the other part that you asked about my faith and writing and
Being a
family?
mother,
Yeah,
being a wife, all that impacted. Has that influenced your writing and as well, and all
yeah.
that?
Okay,
And
well, definitely, because I want to show. So yeah, I'm not a romance writer. Basically, for to be a romance, if you take the love story out and there's no story left, you got yourself a romance. So
Yeah.
there's always a love interest in my stories. The way that they are marketed, because of where my reader base lies, the main element that is shown in the book descriptions is going to be the love story element. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's always a lot more going on than just the love story. But I do try to show godly relationships and how it should look. And
Yeah.
even in so many Christian families and Christian households, people don't have any idea how a marriage should look.
Right.
From both, the male and female perspective. So that's definitely how a lot of people say, which couple is you and Marty? And I'm like, all of them. That's
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, teach what I know there. And as a mother, writing, so we've homeschooled, like the real homeschool before it was just park your kid in front of the computer and say they homeschool. I mean, actual homeschool where you have books and teach them and engage. So we've been homeschooling the whole time, and I have learned so much. Like I would never sit down and just read a science textbook for funsies, and now I've read them all.
Yeah, right.
And history, and so getting to pour, because I love the research for these things, and I try to give because every book has a new main character basically. You see, it's in the village. You get to know a lot of the same people, but so I pick out occupations or skills for them I would like to learn, and then I go learn how to do that so that I can speak intelligently to them doing that. So I'm like, I've learned to do, things that I never thought existed, and so homeschooling, you learn about stuff that is like, didn't even know that,
Yeah.
especially because we have a Navy pilot that lands there. He's going to know things I don't know.
Yeah.
And to know that this place is hidden, I didn't want it to be fantasy. So the difference in fantasy and sci-fi, they're both speculative fiction. They're both what if. So it's what if there's a land. So it's speculative fiction. That's why sometimes they get kind of, categorized as sci-fi. But there's no laser guns. It's not that kind of sci-fi. It's so science fiction explains things scientifically, whereas fantasy explains it with magic or supernatural, So I wanted it to be more, he could come up with scientific reasons, so I had to research so much stuff, because there's a lot of stuff out there even the military can't explain, So I had to research a lot of stuff to explain why there could be some scientific reason, combine them together, and our satellites can't pick up these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I blended all of those.
That takes a lot. I mean, just because, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of stuff that even, military and government just they don't have an answer for. But we still are finding islands, we still are finding things that they're like, oh, this hasn't been on any map before. So that's an interesting aspect. I don't even know where to begin, I couldn't imagine the dives you would have to take on the internet or whatever and finding credible sources. So it takes a lot of work. It sounds like a lot of work just to get that that meat and potatoes of the story behind the background of it to even begin to develop characters. So all of that work prior to developing characters. Now, would you say any of the characters are developed off of people you personally know, or you take examples from them, or is it just interactions you've had that you're like, oh, that sounds like somebody I could have in this book?
Yeah. Okay. So for the characters, what I did was I took all that family research I did, and I printed out all the names I have so they left the United States in 1860. So I use any first names that were in my family before 1860. I'm sorry. So that's where I got the first names, and then the last names come out of my family history as well. So I've mixed and matched. So nobody's named after any character. The first main character in the first book, she is a village physician. She's the first female doctor they've had, and she's based on, in my family research, I've got a fifth great grandmother who was a frontier doctor. And I found her in an Indiana textbook, and it said that she could ride her horse so fast back to whoever they said needed help that she'd beat the messenger back. like at night, all this kind of stuff. And she had 8 children. And by the time they'd moved to Indiana, she was almost 60, and I'm like, this woman, I'm like, oh my goodness, And so then I had to find a man that was man enough to match that,
Yeah,
So it's
that's
like,
fair.
you know,
That's fair.
that's my escape. We're
Yeah.
not going to have, the typical modern guy isn't going to be, man enough for a woman that strong. And so in that way, that she's kind of the only one that was based on anybody.
Okay.
And then I love like the Myers-Briggs personalities and the 16 personalities, just a kind of basic sort of thing. So what a lot of authors do is they'll write themselves. It's their personality, and then they just kind of write that same book over and over and over. That's a lot of fiction readers. I know, not you guys, but people who read fiction will get an author they like, and then you get a few books in, and you're like, these are all exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's because they're just writing themselves.
Right.
So I intentionally study all the different basic, like there's 16 basic personalities. Yeah, there's a lot of accents and everybody's different, but I try to make sure I have all the personalities. So I'll write characters that they're not a person I would hang out with.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't get along with them, but I have to like them for the story. So that's just to keep it different, because I did not want to write a series that every book is the same or the
Right.
same sort of characters, same sort of feel. So nobody's based on, people in my family or people that I know. As far as someone inspiring something, occasionally somebody will say something and it'll just be quirky enough that I'm like,
Okay.
I think it's in your family.
That's going to be me if she's talking about people that say quirky things around
No, you
her.
said something about one of your children one time that was a funny quirk I'd never heard, and I was working on a kid in my story, and he has a very similar quirk, and I was like, he would do that, So you do pick out, things out of life, but no, nobody's based on anybody.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Okay, so what I'm really interested in, I guess, is from a pastor perspective, looking out at the congregation, and the people in the church. I want to see people just take whatever God has given them as far as giftedness, abilities, and just use that for His glory. And I think a lot of times people are unsure on how they can use particular things, particular gifts or abilities, and they don't really see a context. Because I don't think sometimes as the church, we do a good enough job of building people up in that are different. Like for me, I did sports growing up, all that type of stuff. So it's really easy for me to tell athletes, okay, this is how you can use your sports for God's glory. Someone that's more creative, I'm like, yeah, I got nothing for you. And I think that's the beauty of the church coming together is where I may not be able to speak into that. You can. And I think that's important for people to hear that, to understand that, yeah, you can take any of these gifts and abilities, turn them and use them to encourage people in the faith, to help people out. If you love sci-fi, if you love writing, if you love fantasy, if you love it, we can take any of those type things and turn it. And I think that's really interesting and really cool, especially how you come up with some of the themes. I know you have a new book in the series coming out, which is entitled
Uncharted Peace.
Uncharted Peace.
Yeah.
Look, I even wrote down all the different titles so far.
Oh, wow.
Like The Land Uncharted, and then Redemption, Inheritance, Hope, Journey, Destiny, Promise, Freedom, Courage, Christmas, Grace, Peace. And I really liked the story of why peace. And that the idea of just how I'm going to let you explain it because I think you'll explain it better. But just tell everybody, like, okay, Uncharted Peace, like your idea of like, okay, why peace is important and how you kind of came to that idea of like why peace is really good.
Yeah. Okay. So for this book, yeah, Uncharted Peace, we can read a lot in Christian nonfiction, the books about finding peace, or yes, Jesus is our peace. This is a little different, or especially with so many people with the anxiety right now. They think the opposite of peace, or that peace is the opposite of war, or whatever. I had a moment a few years ago with a godly lady, a friend of our family, that she was over staying at the house and got up the next morning, and she's one of these Southern ladies that does her hair for like an hour. I don't. And so I was just sitting in the hall, and she's doing her hair, and she's talking to me, and while we're sitting there, she's talking about curling irons and stuff. And I was just like, it is so peaceful to have her around, you know? And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I know she's a prayer warrior, and she spends more time in the Word than on her hair. But it was just this interesting feeling. And then I noticed around other people that you could just really get a sense of peace when they're around.
Yeah.
And then somebody told me a few years ago that I was backstage in a green room at doing a worship thing, and they're like, same thing, but about me. And I thought, oh, okay, and I just started noticing that that there are certain people that and it's believers, and I don't know, whatever stage they are in their walk with Christ, whatever it is. And I just wanted to show that as somebody that you just, when the particular person's around, you can just feel peace. And so that's kind of each book has a spiritual theme a little bit. And so in this one, we get to find out why that is, and how to be that for others.
And I think that is something missing in a lot of our culture today. Just looking around, just my interactions with people, talking about people, there's a lot of anxieties, especially in an election year. There's a lot of anxieties just in day-to-day life, dealing with kids, dealing with family, all sorts of just constant bombardment of anything other than peace in people's life. And I do think it's important who we surround ourselves with, and who we kind of bring into our inner circles, and who we live life with, and that can impact that. And I don't know, I just thought that was an interesting look at it, as far as we talk about just get peace, but we don't talk about what it's like being around people that just have that sense of peace. And I think that's a pretty neat concept to think about. Like, you are more comfortable around certain people. You can just breathe. And I started thinking about that, and I started thinking of several people. I could think of my roommate from college, one of my best friends in the world, Ben, and just hanging out with him is kind of like you can almost like, there's almost a relaxing feeling around certain people, and I think we forget how important that is.
Yeah.
To
you read
be
Matthew
that.
Henry. Matthew Henry's a Puritan writer, but he had a discourse on meekness and quietness of spirit. Have you read that one?
I haven't read that one.
So good. It's a thin book. But it's weighty. I mean, he's a Puritan writer.
I've kind of ruined on Puritan writers.
Oh no.
Yeah. So when I first started as the minister of students here, he gave me a list of books, and he said, we're going to read these, we're going to discuss them. And some of them were really good. And I'm not saying John Owen's book isn't good. And he saw the note I have in my office on that book. It says, read again. And because for some reason, like I told you, prior to this podcast, was my retention when I read it's very difficult for me to sit and read and just retain what I'm getting. I'll have to go over spots again, over and over again, full chapters sometimes, or I'll get to the end of a book and go, what did I just read? Now, I've trained and I've been developing, safeguards and methods to get that to where I can retain more. But man, reading that one, I was just like, I feel like this guy's saying the same thing over and over again. But having gone back in different points in ministry so far, and looking at different Puritan writers and reading some of the early fathers' writings and stuff like that, I now am starting to read it, so I'm excited to read that. But man, that was one brutal book to read. So he did ruin it in a sense, but it also opened my eyes to just like the way they talk is a lot different than how we talk.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because they carry a lot of weight with their words, where words for us have become just very flippant.
Yes.
They don't mean as much now as they used to back then. To understand grace or peace, whenever we talk about peaceful people, like when I think about peaceful people, I think about, when I came home from Iraq, and my mom couldn't come back to El Paso to see me, and I wasn't married. I didn't have family down there. It was just me, and it was a very difficult time. But I was able to fly back home shortly after it, and just to hug my mom was so much peace. Just because for that moment, when my dad and mom were standing there, for that moment, everything else was gone. I was just hugging them, and I knew that they were going to pray over me. I knew that they were going to love on me, that whatever I talked about was protected, and that's that peace And I, just listening to you guys talk about that, that's what I was thinking. I was like, man, I know what that piece is. I know exactly what that is. And then I'm sitting there thinking too, like, how do I get there though? Like, how do I get to that point where people go, man, you're just peaceful to be around? Well, I don't know.
Do you give us a how-to in the book on how to be that person?
Maybe not as such. Maybe I'll defer back to Matthew Henry.
Yeah. I'm gonna have
But
to
no,
write that down.
I think that's a really, so if there is a lot of anxiety, if you're struggling with that, or if you struggle with a lot of worry and you think the world is falling apart and you're too fixated on that, reading and books is a fantastic way to maybe pause that for a moment
Yeah.
and refresh. And do you get a lot of, as far as like feedback from people that read and things like that, is that part of that helps in just in our own mental and emotional health and things like that?
Oh, I get hundreds of emails. The main reason people read fiction is company. That's actually the reason people read fiction is for company. It's for the characters. You think about when people read fiction, usually they're alone or I have a lot of people that they're going through medical issues. People sit and read while they're getting their chemo and their dialysis.
Yeah, they passed books out when I was over deployed left and right. We just go pass.
And that matters. It gives you company for a while. That's why I've stuck in this series for so long. People love the characters, so I want to write characters that you want to be with.
Yeah,
they feel like friends, and that matters. It's about 60% of my readers are women 55 and up, which is basically when people have time to read a lot anyway. And that age group really, they want the vintage values, so they appreciate where I'm coming from. I have a lot of non-Christian people that'll email me that they read them just because they're so sick of what's out there.
Right.
But they at least know it's going to be clean. And that's why the covers with like the girls in the prairie dresses are on it. That immediately tells readers what this is, who it's for and what it is, and that it's going to be
almost transform them just by looking at them. I know.
You can look at it and you go, it's a girl and she's covered and it's rural and, so you immediately get that idea. Kind of like what people do with Amish fiction, bonnet books. You see the bonnet book and you go, okay, there's not going to be any abs in this one. We're good. So, that matters.
Yeah. All right. So talking about your book, it's coming out, Uncharted Peace. And when's the release date?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
19th.
Awesome. And you can go to KeelyKeith.com.
Sure.
And that's one way
to
access information about your books, get the books and look at those and all that good stuff. And just kind of as we kind of close out our time with you, there are a couple things that I highlighted in some of the book descriptions and things like that, like setting an excellent example of holy matrimony in his church. Like you're thinking through those things and you're thinking through what is going to build people up. And like we mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of that out there in the world. And so I would encourage you, if you're looking for something to kind of build you up, give you an idea of kind of like just maybe an escape for a little bit. I don't think we were ever meant to live on these 24-hour news cycles, social medias, where we know everything about everybody and everything that's going on. It can overwhelm our systems. And we need to learn to decompress. Why not decompress with something that's going to build you up in your faith and encourage you and I don't know, like maybe give you a little sense of hope, and also to learn that, look, God uses a vast array of people and things to use for his glory, and you just need to step out and do those things. And so Keely's a great example of you just step out and use what God is, maybe the passions and gifts he's given you, and you can use those things for his glory in maybe ways that you didn't think you would. And so I appreciate it, because that is not a way I could contribute to the faith, but that's the beauty of us being a family of believers, is a lot of different parts all working together to build up the body. And so thank you for that. And if there's a word of encouragement that maybe you can give to fellow believers that maybe you're kind of like, well, I don't know if I need to step out. I don't really know if I need to take that step and get out there. What's a word of encouragement you would give to them?
As far as writing,
or
speak of the writing.
just in general, just you were willing to step out there and do that. If someone's holding back, what would you tell them?
Well, first, I would tell them to look for the person in your life that you can encourage to step out, because that was huge. The little push from Marty, just write your book.
Yeah.
That is huge. There are so many people that have a dream or have a gift or have something they'd like to put out, even if it's just for themselves. It doesn't have to get published or whatever. That the encouragement in their own home or the discouragement is going to make all the difference. So first, try to look to your spouse. Is there something they're dreaming of that you could encourage, or you see a way that God could use them that they're, too tired or timid, or they don't know that you're actually behind them. So start there. Start with trying to encourage someone, and then yes, if God's put something on your heart, even if it's just for you. And I know all of our 5th grade teachers told us we had a book inside us, and that's not true. That's not true.
You wouldn't want any book I write.
So that's fine. You don't have to write a book.
Yeah.
And almost everyone, the first book they write is just therapeutic for themselves. So yeah, if you've got an idea, just write it. Just sit down and write it. Don't worry about the market and publishers and agents and all those things. Just write your story. And the first one's not going to get published anyway. So just go for it.
Awesome. All right. Well, Aaron, do you got any follow-ups you would like to do?
No, that's it. I think that was great. I really appreciate you coming and speaking to us about your books and the series that you're writing. It was wonderful conversation. It's just awesome to sit down and get to know you more, and then just let everybody else get to know you more and what you're doing and how you use your gifts that God gave you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks for
And
having me, guys.
of all the interviews that you're going to do and marketing things you're going to do, I think we're going to be the most unique and your favorite and the funnest.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Definitely.
Definitely. See, we're going to definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
No take backs now. But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Studio.
Yeah. Yeah. One day we'll give a behind the scenes tour of our studio.
I'll keep the magic
and
alive.
our process. Yeah.
We need to.
Yeah. But yeah,
Awesome.
thank you. And hey, final words, guys, just we walk by faith, not by sight. And you step out, use your gifts for the glory of God, and God is faithful, and He will move and do things. And if you never need encouragement or you need help with those things, I know we'd be more than happy to help with you, pray with you. If you're kind of like, hey, I want to kind of write, I'm sure if you see Keely at church, she would somehow find a way to talk about writing, I'm sure, to you in some way, shape, or form, anything like that. So until next time.
That's right. We are the Baptist Boyz.
All right. Bonus episode.